A sudden, cold draft swept through the quiet house, even though every window was sealed. It was the moment I realized the boundary had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. My quiet suburban life, meticulously maintained and paid for, was now a crime scene. A single paw print, too deliberate to be my K9's, too small to be a man's, was pressed into the mud outside the back door. The enemy, the neighborhood tyrant I called the HOA Karen, had finally acted on her malice. I was miles away, but I knew with a sick certainty that she was already inside. The question was simple, but terrifying. What price would she pay for the piece she was trying to steal? The home was not a house. It was a fortress of quiet, earned peace. After years of hard work, the homeowner, known in the community only as the quiet observer, had found his sanctuary. The walls were thick, the lawn was immaculate, and the tall, privacy-giving fence was an unspoken agreement with the world to simply be left alone. This was the reward, a meticulously organized existence in a picture-perfect neighborhood called the Meadows, where every blade of grass seemed to stand at attention. Life there was a comfortable routine dictated by the rise and fall of the sun, and the familiar, grounding presence of his dog, Atlas. Atlas was no mere pet. He was a magnificent, highly trained Belgian Malinois K9, a silent shadow with the heart of a protector and the discipline of a soldier. He was the only company the homeowner needed, and their bond was the most vital thing in that beautiful, silent house. Everything was by the book. The house was compliant, the dog was contained, and the routine was sacred. But every Eden has its serpent. In the Meadows, it wore a pastel suit and a veneer of suburban authority. Mrs. Albright, the self-appointed chair of the HOA Architectural Review Board. She saw compliance not as a standard, but as a challenge. Her eyes were microscopes, constantly scanning for the tiny, insignificant flaw that would allow her to insert her will into the lives of others. For months, she had circled the homeowner's property, unable to find fault with the perfectly manicured landscape. She obsessed over the implication of the high fence, the suggestion of privacy it represented, and the very presence of the large, a stoic dog. The homeowner had ignored her passive-aggressive notes about curb appeal maintenance and acceptable canine weight standards. He had built a life on solid ground. He believed that the rules, fairly applied, protected his peace. He was about to learn a brutal truth. When power is held by the petty, the rules become weapons. The first official violation notice had arrived that morning, taped aggressively to his front door, demanding access to the interior of his property for an unannounced inspection of unapproved structures. The battle for quiet peace was over. The war for the sanctity of the home had just begun. The arrival of Mrs. Albright's violation notice was the opening shot in a psychological war, yet the homeowner reacted with the cool detachment of a trained professional. He knew the HOA documents were the true battlefield. He had read them, had signed them, and he would now wield them. His first countermeasure was simple. Send a certified letter denying the mandatory interior inspection, citing the clause that prohibited any entry onto private property without a court order or immediate life-threatening emergency. He believed this would be the end of it. He was profoundly wrong. The certified letter, designed to be a definitive legal shield, only served as an irritant to Mrs. Albright, whose sense of authority was less about the law and more about her personal power. Her response was immediate, petty, and relentless. The fines began instantly, accumulating like a toxic weed. The initial violation, the vague, nonsensical charge about unapproved structures inside the home, was now escalating daily. The homeowner would retrieve the mail to find a fresh, brightly colored envelope demanding payment, each one containing an increasingly absurd rationale for the growing debt. First came the high-visibility fence fine. The 6-foot privacy fence, perfectly within code, was suddenly deemed a community security risk because it obscured the view into his yard, denying the HOA the pleasure of continuous surveillance. Then came the unsanctioned water usage fine. The impeccable lawn, the very thing the HOA was supposed to encourage, was now a liability, a symbol of excessive consumption, despite the fact that his water bill was well below the neighborhood average. The fines were designed not to correct a problem, but to financially suffocate him into compliance. The true escalation, however, centered on Atlas. The dog, a creature of immense discipline and loyalty, became Mrs. Albright's obsession. The quiet observer had gone to great lengths to ensure Atlas was never a nuisance. He was always walked on a short leash, never barked unless truly provoked, and his designated outdoor area was completely hidden from view. Yet the fines shifted focus again. Aggressive breed presence, read the next notice, a ridiculous assertion since the HOA bylaws were silent on specific breeds. It was quickly followed by a noise pollution fine, claiming Atlas's menacing silence was somehow more disturbing than the actual yapping small dogs on the street. The absurdity of the charges was suffocating, turning the concept of homeownership into a frantic defensive game of legal whack-a-mole. The emotional toll began to mount. The simple act of retrieving the mail transformed from a mundane chore into an act of dread. Every car slowing on the street became a potential surveillance vehicle. The peace he had paid for was now shattered, replaced by an acute, visceral awareness of being watched, judged, and systematically targeted. The homeowner felt the frustration of a decent person forced to fight a shadow, a bureaucratic, malicious, and entirely petty shadow. He meticulously documented everything. Every fine notice was photographed, time-stamped, and categorized. Every time a member of the HOA board, usually Mrs. Albright herself, dressed in an aggressively cheerful visor and carrying a clipboard, was spotted driving slowly past his property, it was logged. He was building a mountain of evidence, preparing for the day he would finally confront the HOA in a legal setting where facts mattered more than feelings. But the sheer volume of the assault was relentless. The mailbox fines led to the escalation of physical interference. On a Tuesday morning, he found a bright orange "Unapproved" sticker slapped crudely onto his beautiful cedar fence, an act of blatant, illegal vandalism. He peeled it off, documented the damage, and knew he was sinking deeper into a personalized war against an institution that had gone rogue. The stakes shifted dramatically when he discovered a small, almost invisible camera lens mounted into the base of a neighbor's lamppost, pointed directly at his garage. This wasn't just fines anymore. This was active, illegal surveillance. The homeowner's blood ran cold. He didn't just feel angry. He felt violated, stripped of the most fundamental right his home was supposed to provide: privacy. He took a breath, recognizing that he had to change tactics. Responding to the fines was merely playing her game. He needed a move that would seize the initiative and expose the tyrant for the criminal she was becoming. He began the quiet, meticulous work of setting his own trap. He installed a new, state-of-the-art security system throughout his home, focusing particularly on a discrete camera that had the ability to record long periods of activity, triggered only by unusual, low-level movements. He didn't tell anyone about the new system, not even his lawyer. This was no longer about winning a legal battle over lawn height. This was about protecting his personal safety and the sanctuary of his home. The HOA's harassment culminated in a final, dizzying act of trespass that week. The homeowner had planned a rare overnight trip for a work conference, a necessity he usually avoided. He left at dawn, ensuring Atlas was secure inside, his protective instincts on high alert, even without explicit command. The house was locked, the alarms were set to silent, and the new camera system was fully armed. He knew he was leaving a vulnerability, a dark hole in his perfect defense, and he was counting on his antagonist to be too blinded by hubris to resist. He had been gone for barely 4 hours when the notification flashed across his phone screen. It wasn't the standard "door closed" alert. It was a sequence of low-resolution images showing a shadow lingering near his back door, followed by a sudden, jarring movement. The image resolved itself, sickeningly clear. Mrs. Albright, the HOA Karen, was physically breaking the lock on his back door. The invasion was real. The legal battle had become a criminal confrontation. The images kept feeding through, showing her stepping triumphantly, maliciously, into the dark interior of his home, believing the house to be empty, believing she was finally owed the satisfaction of her absolute authority. The homeowner, watching this horror unfold miles away on a highway, felt a surge of cold, focused determination. She had crossed the line she couldn't uncross. But then the final image arrived. A low-light snapshot from the living room camera, and a shiver of terrifying satisfaction ran through him. The digital tether connecting the homeowner to his sanctuary held the frozen image of his greatest fear and his deepest satisfaction. HOA Karen. Mrs. Albright, standing motionless in the middle of his living room, staring down the calm, immense figure of Atlas. Miles away, the homeowner's world had narrowed to the low-light footage flickering on his phone. He could see the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light filtering from the kitchen, and he could see the pure, unadulterated shock melting the malice from Mrs. Albright's face. The triumph she had felt just moments before, as the cheap lock on the back door surrendered to her crude tool, was instantly replaced by raw, paralyzing terror. She had assumed an empty house, a silent victory. She had walked directly into a trap she had set for herself. Atlas hadn't moved. The K9 was a master of stillness, his training a weapon far more potent than any physical action. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood between the intruder and the deeper recesses of the home, a silent, implacable sentinel. His body language was a masterpiece of controlled threat. Ears slightly up, posture low, tail perfectly still. He was giving her what she had never given anyone in the community, a final warning. The homeowner, watching, could almost hear the frantic calculations inside Mrs. Albright's mind. She was trapped. She couldn't scream, as that would bring the very attention she was trying to avoid. She couldn't run, as that would trigger the chase response in the dog, something she intuitively understood. She was reduced from the powerful, micromanaging tyrant to a simple, trespassing criminal, utterly at the mercy of the situation. The camera, recording faithfully from its hidden perch, captured every bead of sweat, every flicker of panic in her eyes. The homeowner knew he had to keep watching, to let the scenario play out, to document the full arc of the invasion. He understood that any intervention, a phone call, a remote alarm, would break the perfect tension, potentially turning a moment of captured comeuppance into a confused confrontation. He needed the climax to be clean, undeniable, and utterly devastating to her authority. After what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Albright made her first, fatal move. She tried to speak, but only a choked squeak escaped. She then took a clumsy, backward step toward the door she had violently opened. This was the precise moment Atlas had been trained for. Not a charge, not an attack, but a sudden, authoritative correction. The K9 let out a single, deafening bark, a sound designed to stun, to disorient, and to fully communicate the gravity of the trespass. The sound was so powerful, so concussive in the closed space, that Mrs. Albright did exactly what she was not supposed to do. She stumbled, lost her footing, and crashed into the homeowner's prized bookshelf, sending a cascade of leather-bound books and ceramic art shattering onto the hardwood floor. In that instant, she was not just a trespasser. She was a vandal, a thief of peace, and a destroyer of property. The sound of the crash was loud enough to trigger the secondary audible alarm the homeowner had secretly installed. The siren began to wail, a shrill, piercing cry that announced to the entire neighborhood what had just transpired. Mrs. Albright, adrenaline now overriding her fear, scrambled frantically backward, clawing at the broken lock, desperate only to escape the light that was about to shine on her shame. As she finally wrenched the door open and sprinted out into the blinding afternoon sun, the homeowner saw the final piece of the climax fall into place. The neighbor across the street, the one whose security camera had previously been pointed at his garage, was now standing on his lawn, frozen, holding a rake, his mouth agape. He had heard the siren, the crash, and had now seen the furious, panicked exit of the neighborhood's supreme authority figure, fleeing a home she had just illegally entered. The exposure was instant, raw, and public. The homeowner pulled over to the side of the highway, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the immense relief and vindication that flooded him. He had everything: The video of the illegal entry, the audio of the internal crash and the siren, and the public visual of her desperate flight. The petty war over lawn height and aggressive breeds had ended with a clear, unequivocal felony. He didn't call the police to report the break-in. That would be a messy, immediate scene. He called his lawyer and sent one single chilling email to the HOA board, CCing every single homeowner in the community, attaching a single still image from the footage. Mrs. Albright, frozen in terror, with Atlas's unblinking eyes as the only witness. The homeowner had not merely defended his property, he had detonated the entire foundation of her authority. The moment the siren wailed and the neighbors watched her run, the HOA chairwoman lost her power. The terror she intended to inflict had been delivered back to her, multiplied by the shame of public exposure. The immediate aftermath of the break-in was a strange, pervasive silence across the meadows. The shrill of the homeowner's alarm had stopped, but the reverberations of Mrs. Albright's panic, captured in the security footage and disseminated via the mass email, were only just beginning. The homeowner did not rush home. His lawyer, viewing the pristine video evidence, advised him to maintain distance, letting the public shame and the criminal severity of her actions ripen. This was no longer a dispute. It was a felony case with irrefutable proof. The homeowner's strategic detachment amplified the chaos within the HOA. Mrs. Albright's defense, if she even attempted one, was DOA. There could be no plausible deniability. The footage didn't just show her standing inside. It showed the violent, clumsy act of forcing the door open. Her own neighbors, the very people she had terrorized with trivial fines and relentless judgment, were now witnesses, seeing the monster she truly was exposed in the digital light of their inboxes. The collective, silent rage of years of petty bureaucracy was finally unleashed, not on the homeowner, but on the deposed tyrant herself. The first tangible victory arrived swiftly. An emergency board meeting was called, not to address the security breach, but to manage the catastrophic legal liability Mrs. Albright had manufactured. The homeowner did not attend. His lawyer simply sent a letter detailing the documented felony trespass, the vandalism, the sustained pattern of harassment, and the homeowner's intent to pursue criminal charges and civil remedies. The message was clear: cooperate or sink with her. Within 48 hours, the resolution arrived, unanimous, swift, and devastatingly satisfying. Mrs. Albright was immediately stripped of her position on the Architectural Review Board and the main HOA board. Her meticulously created empire of petty authority collapsed into dust. But the victory went further. The board, desperate to sever all ties with her catastrophic judgment, officially voided every single fine issued to the homeowner, from the initial unapproved structures to the absurd, menacing silence of Atlas. A full, written apology was issued, citing gross misconduct and breach of trust by a former member. The financial debt, the months of stress, the psychological warfare, all erased, leaving behind only the cold, hard fact of his vindication, the criminal consequences. However, delivered the final, resonant blow. When the police concluded their investigation based on the video evidence, Mrs. Albright was facing serious charges. The homeowner did not want a prolonged public trial. He wanted her gone. A plea deal was orchestrated. A quiet, efficient resolution that delivered the ultimate consequence. Mrs. Albright was forced to sell her home and permanently vacate the meadows with a strict no-contact order. Her home, the physical platform from which she had launched her campaign of terror, was now a symbol of her spectacular, self-inflicted defeat. The once feared tyrant vanished, leaving behind only the reputation of a criminal and the memory of her folly. In the months that followed, the atmosphere in the meadows transformed. The fear that once permeated the community, the fear of the clipboard and the aggressive visor, was replaced by a quiet vigilance. The remaining HOA board, chastened and terrified of repeating the failure, adopted a new, measured approach. The homeowner, the quiet observer, became the community's unexpected, silent guardian. No one dared to question his high fence, his perfectly conditioned lawn, or the magnificent, stoic K9, who was now legendary. Atlas had become more than a protector. He was the symbol of the unyielding boundary that should never have been tested. He, homeowner, walked his property, the silence no longer the silence of apprehension, but the silence of earned peace. He looked at the back door, now reinforced and impeccably sealed, and remembered the flicker of terror on Mrs. Albright's face as she met the eyes of Atlas. The dog, resting peacefully on the cool hardwood floor, was the only witness who had kept his cool, the only entity who had acted purely on instinct and training. The long-term impact of the dispute was a powerful lesson, not just for the homeowner, but for every resident of the meadows and, by extension, every person living under a petty tyranny. The story was a testament to the power of documentation over confrontation. He had never raised his voice, never resorted to vandalism, and never broken a rule. He simply installed a camera and let his antagonist destroy herself with her own greed for control. This wasn't a story about winning an argument. It was a story about defending the sanctity of one's home. It proved that power, even the small, frustrating power of an HOA, is only absolute until it attempts to cross the fundamental, legally protected boundary of private life. When faced with malice and absurdity, the best revenge is often the cold, undeniable truth. The homeowner settled back into his fortress of quiet, earned peace, knowing that the cost of vigilance was far lower than the cost of submission. He looked at Atlas, who returned the gaze with the loyalty of 1,000 years, and understood the final, profound takeaway. If the pettiness of others threatens to destroy your peace, ensure your defense is not built of anger, but of cold, unblinking surveillance. But the question remains, for every homeowner who has ever faced a local tyrant, do you trust that your boundaries are strong enough? Or are you waiting for your own HOA Karen to find the weakest lock?